carryover balance that's adequate. So after fiscal year 2025, we will have $339 million as of right now. We just got updated numbers. The tax collections actually exceeded our expectations slightly, and that was good news. So the Council on Revenues, which will give us numbers in September, again, as you get closer and closer month over month to when they make their announcements, the numbers become more concrete. And so our economy is holding. I will also say this: we appropriated over $200 million for the Maui wildfire recovery into our major disaster fund. Very important that I clarify that, because I did ultimately have to veto 3068, Senate Bill 3068. That bill had a technical challenge with it. It had accidentally removed a big piece of our housing budget, and so we had to correct that in collaboration with our colleagues. So no harm, no foul. Let's go to the next slide. Let's talk about probably the most important thing that happened, and also something that people have been pushing back on, which I understand. We should have vibrant debates, but let's be honest, almost everybody voted for this tax reform. It's historic. You heard about it when we signed it a couple weeks ago. It's $5.6 billion in tax reductions across the board, changing some of the brackets, but basically zeroing out taxes on the individuals that are in the lowest 40% of earnings for our state. Used to be people from 25% down paid no taxes. Now that will go up to about 40%. Also, it's going to be more taxes on very high earners as a percentage. That's very important. This has been debated. 70+% of the decrease for this, the tax break is going to working class families. And when you look at this, you can see we right now are on the left-hand side with that yellow bar, where we're the second highest income tax burdened family or society in the country for families of four. We go to the fourth lowest over time to 2031. How do you pay for that? You make sure your economy is churning ahead. We're doing a lot of stimulus for our economy. There's going to be a lot of growth because of the rebuilding of Maui and the housing boom that we are now a part of. And frankly, it just was a burden on us because we couldn't afford to live in Hawaii anymore. Affordability is the number one issue, essentially tied with housing when we have conversations with people and we poll. So that's the reason for that. Let's look at the next page so you get a better description of exactly what the affordability plan GAP, we call it GAP 2, will provide as far as the historic tax relief. This is what it looks like exactly for the standard deduction change. So that's the best way to do things. You increase the standard deduction, and for single individuals, you can see how it escalates from 44, goes up to 4,400, doubles next year. So people in January will start seeing lower taxes, and it will go all the way up to $12,000 for single individuals. Now let's look at what the actual impact will be. You will save $1,000, $995, if you are a person making $75,000 in 2025, and that will escalate up to $2,372. And for, say, a family that has two earners that are making $150,000, they have two dependents, you can see how it will increase their tax break from just under $2,000 in 2025, ultimately up to $4,712 by the end of this. And so that's about $400 a month, which is groceries, or it's helping in case their rent is too high, or if they have to get a second car. I mean, so these are the realities of it, and it really will increase people's take-home pay. That's what's important. Some people I hear have pushed back on it, saying the tax break is too big. Tell that to people trying to stay in Hawaii. I mean, so, I welcome input, and we'll continue year over year to look at what we can afford, but know that there's going to be some major budgetary reform next year from my team as we get rid of positions that have not been filled for 4, 5, 10 years. Those positions will go away very likely, and we'll increase salaries for people that are in jobs. So that's the approach, and that will save a lot of money. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves today. That's going to be a big discussion for next year. Let's jump into housing and homelessness. So you go to the next slide. Some big things happened. I'll remind people that we passed landmark short-term housing reform. This is absolutely a game changer. Now the counties can get rid of the exemptions that were inappropriate in their counties, so that short-term rentals, of which there are 89,000 of them in the state, gradually move to long-term rentals. And if 20% of those move over, it's a big win for us because we have over 50,000 units needed. And as you move thousands of houses into long-term rental categories, it will also decrease the pressure. So there'll be lower rents or more affordable housing to purchase. It's a big deal, and it's also going to hopefully coincide with our settlement, which will come soon, we hope, for all the people of Maui who lost their homes, who had the tragedy strike them. They will then have resources, we hope, to buy short-term rentals off the market and have homes as we rebuild. So there's lots going on there. We passed 2 bills that affected the Solar Hui program and CPACER programs. This allows us to do green infrastructure, put solar on top of condos. Again, it's a move to get to full renewable. A lot of times people couldn't afford to put solar on their condos, so that's helpful. We are continuing, of course, to appropriate millions of dollars for Kauhale. I shared that with you. Once we get to 20 Kauhale, that will be about 1,700 Kauhale individual units, 1,700. And imagine what that does to help bring down the point-in-time count and to help individuals who are struggling. And they will go from Kauhale to more permanent housing. And we have a lot of additional ideas in that space. My Kauhale team can't really practically keep up as we recommend one after another. And we were really grateful to have so much time to work with, in this case, Mayor Blangiardi. I'm even looking at new ways to buy more buildings, provided that they help families who are in dire need. And then there's some appropriations I wanted to mention for the Hawaii Community Development Authority and Hawaii Public Housing Authority. We announced, I believe it was 10,800 units early in the year that we will begin the process of funding because we have just great need at the public housing level. This was one unit, the HHFDC in this picture, that built at the Ililani condos. Small condos, but beautiful. And, that's how a family of, 3 or 4 people can live and afford to live in the town. Okay, next to healthcare. So, a lot of investment in healthcare. Senate Bill 3139 establishes an emergency crisis prevention diversion program. So we're working here with CORE so that we can get people off the street who have mental illness and put them into safe space, really medical respite, and not go to the hospital. Remember, it's very expensive if people are in and out of the hospital. We also passed an important bill, and extra credits go, in this case, to, I believe it was Carl Rhodes and Della Bellotti, both of whom have been giving me a lot of crap in the last 24 hours on other issues, but we've been working together very closely on this issue, and I appreciate them. I hope you're listening. This is the Empowering the State-Assisted Community Treatment Program. So that means that people will be able to come off of the streets legally and go into Kauhale or to places like the Diversion Service Program. The big change there was we are now going to incorporate our Attorney General's office to do the legal work to get people off the streets. And look, people can come and go as they need to, but there are a lot of people that have severe and persistent mental illness, and that's why they are homeless. And if they get treated, they will be doing so much better. And usually their elderly parents are the one asking me to pass these bills. So that's why we're doing it. We had some big public health partnerships. You saw us announce the $6.8 million recent partnership, but don't forget we also received a $50 million match from Mark Benioff and his wife for Hilo Hospital. He asked me how much I was going to invest in there, and he said he would match it. And I said, well, I'd like to raise a lot of money, and so we came up with $100 million total. So $50 million from us, $50 million from the Benioff Foundation. So Hilo Hospital and that whole region is going to get better health care. Then he did $100 million, by the way, for Hawaii Pacific Health. Amazing. So that happened, and then finally Senate Bill 1035 exempted once and for all Medicare and Medicaid from any GET tax. So remember, we have in our state 1.4 million people, but 465,000 of them are on Medicaid. So a lot of healthcare providers, it's 1 in 3 of our population, they see an entire panel of Medicaid patients, and the reimbursement has often not been great, although we've been raising it. The feds match what we put in. We put in 48 cents, they put in 52 cents, and then on top of it, we exempted the taxes, the general excise tax, so that our healthcare providers will take care of people. And one more thing that's coupled with is the HELP program. Remember, for those who care for our individuals in need, we're giving them scholarships and repaying their loans. We had 475 in the first cohort, healthcare providers like social workers and nurses and doctors and so on. Then we have 500 coming on in August, and I was just told that for the next cohort we have 2,500 applicants. It's unbelievable. We could actually end the shortage of healthcare providers in 4 years instead of 8 at this rate, provided the legislature continues to generously support this program, and it's very successful. Okay, next one. Preserving our INA. A couple high-level points. We had a lawsuit that we were wrestling with, the Navahine lawsuit. Beautiful woman, young woman sat right there. First name is Navahine, it turns out. And she and the others made a great point, which is we should change the way we go about our greenhouse gas reduction plans. And so in partnership with Ed Sniffen and the Department of Transportation, we did that. We settled the lawsuit at the recommendation of my team and, by the way, the Senate leadership. So we settled that, and it set a model now for the nation. So I think many other states are going to follow. So extra kudos to the Navahine team and their attorneys, who did sue me earlier in the year, but that's okay. We came to an agreement there, too, on affordable housing. See, trying to make this work. We also passed a bill, Senate Bill 2575, which prohibits seabed mining in state waters. Very important because a lot of collateral damage can occur if there's mining there, and we want to keep our waters pristine. So that was great work by the legislature, and we passed several bills to protect our ecosystem, including a lot of appropriations. Again, when people see me do line items, they sometimes get up in arms for a moment, but then we have to remind people that we actually have been increasing our budgets year over year as we make the right appropriations. We just don't want to use cash for programs that are supposed to be bonded. That's an important distinction. I hope people get that. When we're doing long-term planning, long-term expenditures, it's bonds. Short-term cash use should be on immediate problems, like solving the Maui crisis, like getting homeless people off the streets that are otherwise suffering. So it's just a different philosophy. We jump to the next slide. We're getting close to questions. Our keiki. So we found out that we are amongst the, unfortunately, lowest ranked states in preventing hunger. As many as 1 in 3 people are food insecure in our state. There's a large percentage, I believe it's about 10% of people who in some cases have to forego a meal for an entire day. It's completely unacceptable, and Jamie and I are going to pounce on this with the food bank. We met yesterday, but one thing that did happen in the last couple months was we were contacted by the White House, and we have a special positive place in our heart for the White House these days because they've been doing so much for Hawaii. They said if you can come up with a $2.1 million state commitment, we will give you $18 million to do food programs, summer EBT for your keiki. So it happened. The legislature gave us $2.1 million. We made sure that happened. And so we have $20 million of food security, which is a lot in a positive way for public school students, just any kids across our state. We also signed the Harm to Student Registry bill, which closed that loophole so that we can't have anyone slip through the cracks that might have a history of harming kids. So that will be intact now. We invested monies for Hawaiian language immersion, and it's just an excellent thing to do because that's sustaining culture. And we put money into summer learning hubs because, once again, that's where people get their food if they're young during the summer. So last major slide, I think, is about Maui, and then I'll come to the Senate position. Okay, where are we with Maui? So today is day 336 after the wildfire. We are less than a month till the 1-year anniversary, and what it will be is a celebration of their resiliency and recovery in Maui. First, let me say this. Mahalo to everyone who has participated in the recovery, and I mean everyone, from the mayor to our Attorney General's office to all the people, Red Cross, FEMA, everyone, okay? I'd be remiss if I didn't mention CNHA, Hawaii Community Foundation, and so on. So as of the 5th of July, there were no more individuals in the NCS program on the state side, 0. Everyone had been moved out of the hotels. As of that date, there were 62 families that were finalizing their arrangements that the federal government had in their program. That's down to 62 out of 3,071. So we're talking about over 99% of the families are now into long-term housing. And the cases where they aren't, some families had multiple pets. It was challenging. Some people had disabilities and needed to stay these last couple weeks. But at the 1 year mark, all the 3,071 families should be into long-term housing. That's one thing. The debris clearance. The debris clearance is an enormous job that the Army Corps of Engineers has been contracted to do, which the mayor and I approved. They are already 88% plus done. The number is actually a little higher, but I didn't want to force a change in the slides. It's 1% higher now, as of 11 months out. It will be probably 95 to 97% completed by the 1 year anniversary, and people are already getting permits to rebuild their houses in the burn zone. We have to make sure they have clean water and sewer and electricity, but 25 permits already approved as of last week. The debris clearance having been completed means people can go forward and move on with their lives. I've authorized 1,044 units of transitional housing to be built. You will start seeing those housing units in the next probably 3 to 5 days. They're going to start dropping. The sidewalks went in 2 days ago. The feds are joining us. We have 450 units. The federal government, with Bob Fenton, who's been amazing, is doing 169 units. We bought, with the help and support of Lieutenant Governor, and Sylvia's been terrific, we bought a building called Haggai, 175 units there. So this will help us move people now from these long-term rentals, which are very costly to the federal government. Sometimes we pay a little bit. We have our program also, which has about 300 families in it, into these transitional houses. And then long-term housing will pop up and be there for everyone forever. We also are very thankful to Kamehameha Schools, who's planning a very large housing project. We did other things in addition to getting these houses going and making sure people got out of the hotels. We expanded our health care. Tia's team, our wellness and resiliency team, have been amazing, but there are still challenges. We built a free clinic with the help of Kaiser. They put their monies in. We built the school. We also created some fire prevention programs, which you saw us announce. We created the state fire marshal. We announced that last week. We also have just tons of fire breaks put into place and a lot more sensors and weather stations so that we can communicate when there are red flag warnings. And then some serious changes were made. Now the siren system will be utilized based on the county's needs and their determination on the local level when they feel there's a threat. That has been explicitly made clear. And in addition to that, we also now have the power shutdown plan that HECO will run when there is high winds and a red flag warning. It's mostly in the western parts of the state on each of the islands where there's higher risk. There are other major, programs to mention, but we can break out those as we approach the 1 year mark. I will tell you this, that we probably spent, what's fair to say, about $400 million on recovery. Federal government is headed towards $3 billion right now. We tend to spend about 10% of the cost in a 90-10 split. In some cases, we pay zero. I was able to negotiate about a $250 million reduction in our responsibilities by extending that window where it's 100% paid for by the federal government. That's what my trips to D.C. and to these governors' conferences are about, basically. See those federal folks, try to make them understand that it's sometimes slow to get some of the equipment here and to recover. And they've been very accommodating. Last couple things to mention today. Okay, let's get to some of the juicy stuff. So, FESPAC, which we held, in the early part of June, from the 6th to the 16th. It exceeded every possible expectation that we could have. We ended up having 2,200 delegates from 25 nations. It was universally celebrated as a way for Hawaii to rejoin the community of Pacific nations. Polynesia celebrated together, Micronesia and Melanesia, and I just want to thank everybody for their participation. Everyone chipped in. We had ultimately about 600,000 of our citizens or people coming a couple times to see what happened at FESPAC. It only happens every 4 years, and then it goes to another nation, but you guys did us proud. So thank you, everyone, for your participation. The cultural celebration was amazing. The many, many gifts that were given to the state through Jamie and myself are now being cataloged all with experts who will connect them to videos when the celebrations occurred, and we will have exhibits across the state, particularly at Bishop and the State Museum, for years to come. And those will all be in the possession of the state. A couple people have asked that question. amazing to have that as a part of our memory from FESPAC. And I'm personally grateful that we were the administration that got to host FESPAC. That was a great blessing. Okay, so that was our way to help regenerate Oceania, and we're going to continue to engage. We're going to have smaller groups, delegations of 3 or 4 countries come and discuss geopolitics and healthcare issues and global warming. And I believe this is going to be a big partnership with Washington, D.C. too, because they're very proud of what we were able to do to bring people together. Now let's talk about the Hawaii State Senate vacancy. All right, so as everyone knows by now, Senator Shimabukuro retired. She and I served together for, I think it may have been 12 years in the legislature, and then she was in the Senate while I was lieutenant governor and then governor for the last year. So we're dear friends. Miley retired. She's going back to work as a do-gooder in the legal field. So that opened up a seat which requires the Democratic Party to give 3 names. That process takes a little bit of time, and then in total, we have 60 days, calendar days, to appoint somebody. It is my responsibility to appoint somebody. At the same time, I have a responsibility to make sure when we have elections, and we're coming up on an election in August, a primary election date, that everyone get to vote their conscience, and that no one gets special treatment, that no one gets a leg up on other people who are competing. Now, the Democratic Party, by statute, gives those 3 names, like I said. The 3 names that they presented me to fill the Senate District 22 vacancy are the 2 individuals who are competing against one another for the primary, the 2 Democrats, and then the 3rd individual who's also on the ballot, but he's running to replace Cedric Gates, who's running for the state Senate seat. So all 3 of those names are candidates. They're all good people. Okay, it's not for me to decide, which put me in a very difficult ethical bind. On the one hand, I have to, within 60 days, and that's July 30th, give you guys a name to replace Miley and to carry out the rest of the term. On the other hand, it's not appropriate for me, based on the Constitution, to influence other people, to overly influence by, say, putting my hand on the scale and appointing somebody to that seat who is, in this case, currently running for it. So, as I've shared, I'm very reluctant to put either of the 2 individuals who have been nominated, who are pursuing the nomination from the Democratic Party in the election, to choose from those 2 individuals. It would be better from an ethical standpoint and a process standpoint for me to just wait until the voters have chosen the person in the primary, and then that person could easily be chosen by me to go forward as the person that holds that Senate seat until the general election. I'm going to get some additional legal input. Without a doubt, it's a difficult place to be. I don't think that there is a right answer in this moment. Some people will tell you, as the Senate shared, that I have to, within 60 days, appoint someone. And other constitutional scholars will tell you that by putting someone who is literally on the ballot against an opponent who's on the ballot could prevent a free and fair election. So the only option that will remain will be either to have buy-in from society, to wait till after the primary, or if ultimately the legal advice I get and the community input comes in that I must put that person in, if that is what happens, I will put the 3rd person in who is not running for that seat. Because I do not think it would be appropriate to show favoritism for one of the 2 competitors who will just be 10 days out from the election. I hope people understand that. Normally, I like to do things on the first day, get it done. Put the judges in, let the Senate vote, and so on. This particular circumstance has never arisen before, where all of the nominees for an open seat are active candidates within 2 weeks of an election. I respect the voters too much to weigh in that way and to probably, through actions, determine who they will choose to give someone a leg up. So I wanted to share that with everyone. I'm going to go to the National Governors Association for the next few days. I'll then take a couple days away with my family, but I will be back in time on or before the 30th of July after I get the legal advice to make the final decision. Under any circumstance, next year I will be submitting requests for changes to the Constitution so that we don't have this circumstance arise again. No governor should be put in the position where they would influence an election this directly. So there should be at least a buffer of 90 to 120 days where there is not an appointment for people who are running for a seat. That has to be resolved. There may be some ways to do it through rules. We'll have our policy folks work on that. It would be better if we could just use common sense and ethics rather than, in some cases, internal politics. Internal politics drove this, unfortunately, and I ended up getting a complete slate of individuals that would be one-upping the other. And I just don't feel that it's right. I wanted to really express that, and I will get additional input, like I said, from my Attorney General and from my colleagues. But when I've talked to people across our state, almost to a person, across a large sample, they have told me it is not fair to appoint one person over another when they're right now competing for the seat. It's just not right. So I'm trying to do the right thing. I will ultimately resolve this on or before July 30th. And with that, forgive the long description. I'll just make one or two last final comments about our budget. We can give you some of these charts, but I wanted to share with you we are increasing resources across the board for many programs in education, school-based budgeting, public libraries, our community colleges, and our UH system statewide. We're simply doing it the right way, which is not using cash CIP appropriations, we're using bond appropriations. And we can show you these charts, but we have been increasing our resources for the schools as evidenced last year when there was a large problem with the budget and the $200 million fund that they let me use first went to our schools and to our university. So I did I bristle a little bit at the suggestion that we're not supporting education. We are, absolutely. But under these circumstances, with a enormous major disaster, with $450 million plus that went to pay people's hazard pay, and then, of course, just our general needs on housing and homelessness, I have to keep the lid on. So I vetoed a couple bills to keep money in our budget, like House Bill 40, which keeps $435 million available to us and the legislature to help with different crises. Finally, we maintained the full integrity of the rainy day fund in spite of all of these challenges. Over these 2 years, $1.5 billion remains in the rainy day fund. Hundreds of millions are still in the hurricane relief fund, and we will have a carryover balance of about $1 billion now and then $339 million in the second year. All right. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Mahalo, Governor. Our first question comes from Ashley, Hawaii Public Radio.
Thanks so much. My question was, earlier this week you had said that there was a $300 million off balance with the budget. Can you talk about what created that off balance? Were too many bills passed? And because we know it's not the tax cut that's driving that. And I think also consulate revenues shouldn't take up all of that $300 million. So yeah.
Sure. So that's exactly right. We were about $300 million in the red, and now we are about $339 million in the black. A couple things have happened since then. First and foremost, I was able to veto that single bill that would have earmarked $300 million extra resource to go to the rainy day fund and $135 million which would have gone to an extra payment for the ERS, the retirement system. There were some extra appropriations in the budget which I cut in half for the most part. In some cases I cut down just 20%, monies that our directors felt that they couldn't even expend in the coming year. And so, these were some monies that were appropriated that we didn't even ask for, and therefore I was reluctant to put them on the shoulders of directors that are already trying to catch up with a lot of work over the past several years. We did also get good news. Yesterday, tax receipts came in about $70 million higher, I believe. 60 million, forgive me. $60 million higher, and that will manifest as a $400 million increase over the next 6 years, just so people understand what that will do to the bottom line. And so that's how we made up the monies. Last year, I had to line item $1 billion, and look, we came out fine. Sometimes an administration and the legislature have to fit one another so they can see what we're actually capable of doing. there are a lot of projects that have, over the years, been piled on, for example, to the DOE. Hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of projects, which they either hadn't asked for or didn't yet have the capacity to go out and encumber the monies. Those monies in bonds tend to fall away. So I'm trying to right fit our approach. I am very happy that Randy Moore has been chosen to come aboard the DOE. He, I will tell you, is a fellow Swarthmore graduate, although a few years before me, and that guy is really smart. And I trust in his judgment on how to spend money going forward. So basically, I flipped a $300 million deficit to a $300 million surplus for the out year. Yes, please.
Just really follow up. So I think my question was more so along the lines of what was happening that created the 300 to begin with.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
It was extra appropriations in some budgets with cash. So there were cash CIP projects that had been appropriated, and that's not really the way we normally would like to do things. We'd like to fund larger projects which are over 20 years with bonds. So we cut those cash appropriations. That's one thing. And also, what else can I share with you? Yes, some of the appropriations, for example, we reduced by $5 million here and $10 million there some of those cash appropriations because they already had bond monies on hand that they hadn't yet used. And we're happy to give you two charts which show you how that played out amongst at least 4 different examples: school-based budgeting, libraries, community colleges, and the UH. Truth be told, they still are not going to spend some of those bonds in the next 2 years. And instead of what historically has been happening, which is governors just don't say anything, and then they just don't release people's monies, and they expire after 3 years, I'm doing the opposite. I'm straight up telling people up front what we can actually do so they don't have uncertainty. So in the coming year, there will be more money available to deal with the problems that are on hand. That's a much better approach, I think, for the legislature in general. But it forces people to end up having these moments, these conflicts, because they're answering for what actually happens. I'm answering in real time because I don't like to wait. I hope that's helpful. These are really complicated budgetary decisions to demonstrate on charts because you have different kinds of money. But suffice it to say to the people of Hawaii, I'm obligated to have a surplus so we're safe. We have a $339 million surplus. I think it's important that we have our rainy day funds in case we ever have something that we don't otherwise have dollars for. We have the $1.5 billion there. And finally, we're going to have to settle questions like the Maui wildfire settlements. Those are going to be real dollars. We're going to have other disasters in the future. We really must pass a climate impact fee and have dollars, or a traveler impact fee to have dollars to deal with these things, unless the legislature is willing to dig into rainy day funds or actually make cuts. We have not cut any programs or services. We're just tempering expectations on what can actually get done.
Mahalo, Governor. Our next question comes from Bryce, KHON2.
Thank you. So for that Senate seat, will you commit right now to appointing whoever the people decide to vote for? And would there be any, I guess, situation where you would choose to appoint someone else who wasn't voted for in the primary?
Sure. Okay, so let me go through the absolute rules, okay? We're getting the final legal determination. If it's determined that it's okay for me to appoint an individual after the 60-day window, after the primary, I will absolutely appoint the winner, because those two names were also given to me by the Democratic Party. So that would be totally within bounds. These are the names that were there. It's just the people would have chosen them. If I am forced to choose from the list before the election, because I have to do it within 60 days, I will choose the third individual who is not running for that seat, just to be fair. Those are the two scenarios. Otherwise, I'm just really trying to make sure that the will of the people is actually at play here. It's a unique situation because had this vacancy opened a year ago, it would not have been a big deal. This vacancy happened after these individuals had already announced that they were running for the seat. So it's clear that I would be affecting the outcome of the election if I were to pick either Cedric or Stacey Lynn over one another. It just wouldn't be fair to them. I want to be fair to them. And also, it's just not fair to the people of West Oahu. I respect them too much to do this but I may be forced to put use that third name, who's a very good person, mind you. At least they're not running for the state Senate right now. So I will not be affecting the outcome of that election. That person is running for the state house, however, but it's apples to oranges in this case.
Mahalo, Governor. Our next question comes from Andrew, Honolulu Star Advertising.
Thanks. Can you clarify or speak more about your idea of a 90 to 100-day window? Obviously, anybody you pick whenever, you would have an influence on that person becoming an incumbent.
Yes.
Yeah, how is it better, for a longer period ahead of an election versus only, mere days before an election?
For one reason, because you do want someone in the seat. Let's say, and this has happened on any number of occasions, shortly after an election, 30 or 60 days after an election, someone passes away or they get put into the cabinet, and so there's a sudden vacancy. Well, you have 2 years then and you have to find somebody, but they will have not already announced their candidacy for the seat. So right now, it creates a very unusual conflict. These are people who are already asking for people's votes, already fundraising. They've filed all their papers, they've gone through the vetting process, and now they're also getting the boost of the governor through an appointment. And I just don't think that that's good. So doing it, say I think 120 days before the election, that's before the filing period, so everybody can have a fair chance to decide whether they want to run for office or not. And it's just a more equitable way to go about things. Also, you can't even begin to file for election until, I believe, early February. So putting a space there makes it a lot more fair. There's never going to be a perfect situation. When I first came in as a legislator in 2004, the actual law was the governor could appoint anybody they wanted when there was an open seat. And then during the Lingle administration, that was changed to the prevailing party who had that seat would give 3 names. That was meant to keep funny business from happening. But in this particular case, we ended up having a pretty significant conflict between 3 very good people, but they're all actual candidates. And, people have been very generous with me, and they are reflecting, I suppose, on my policies and what we've accomplished. That should be separate from who gets elected to each of these seats. Every different part of the state has a different flavor, a different ideology, and it's not really my place to be able to plant that person there and then, give them the leg up. That's the premise here.
Mahalo, Governor. Up next, Chad with Civil Beat with a twofer.
Thanks. The first is follow up on the Senate, and the second's on one of the line item vetoes. So just to make sure I got this right, if Stacey Eli wins, she's the next senator, correct?
So again, this
Temporary
is 11 days after
Right,
the election,
correct,
so I have to
yeah.
get final legal approval.
Correct.
If that's right, if Stacey Lynn or
Cedric
Cedric wins that primary, as soon as their votes were certified, I would appoint them to carry out the rest of the term, because it has to be filled by a Democrat, and these were names that were given to me
Right.
for the list. They will have been voted in by their peers in the community.
Got it.
It's the best way. If, however, I'm not allowed to wait past the 60 days in this circumstance, if that's not allowed, the third individual will be appointed to carry out the seat so that I don't show favoritism
Okay.
to either of the other two.
That's my question. That's McConaughey Crab.
Yes.
I believe he is in a crowded primary for District 45, Cedric's seat. Wouldn't he, if named senator, have an advantage over his 3 House competitors in the primary?
The circumstance is tricky, right? I've checked. I'm not allowed to ask for a different list legally, and I'm doing my best to not intervene. At least it would be a different seat, and they would not. This individual Crab would not have any work to do in those 10 days because everyone will be campaigning for the primary.
Right.
But it's an imperfect solution.
Understood.
The better solution, the best solution, would be for me to be able to appoint the person that got the most votes on primary day for the very seat that they're pursuing. And that's-
Absolutely. And
yeah.
was it 90 to 100 days or 120 days?
120. I'm still looking at both. I think 120 days actually would be best because it would go before
Understood.
the filing dates.
Okay, and as you say, you don't have a choice. They pick 3 names. Those are the names the AG may tell you, you got to decide by the 31st. Last question regarding those line item vetoes in HB 1800.
Yes.
I believe there were 19 of them. I know it's kind of technical, but one in particular was for $19 million for some land owned by Castle and Cook up in Wahiwa. It's a Department of Education base yard. Why did you decide to cut that one? This is the one from general obligation bonds. Why was that selected?
Did we reduce this one or cut it completely? Reduced to 10 million. Oh, it was completely reduced. Forgive me. Okay, so that was a part of a larger plan that had been discussed, I think, for the tech park and surrounding. And we just haven't reached final agreement on where the tech park should be, so it's premature to buy the land. I am interested in finding a solution with the Senate and House on a better tech position, because especially our Haima people need it. So I'm hoping that they'll appropriate monies, but we hadn't reached final agreement on the location. And so I didn't think it was right to spend the money before we finalized our agreement.
Okay, thank you.
Mahalo, Governor. This formally concludes the news conference. You can go ahead and close it out.
Okay, so I wanted to say a couple last things. Look, thank you for indulging this long, detailed description of what has happened. I also just want to say I know people have been giving me a whole lot of questions about the presidential election. I'm going to kind of defer talking about that here today, just because it's a very big partisan question, and I am trying to avoid that in this setting best I can. But overall, I want to thank everybody for this first 19 months. A lot of work has been done and a lot of progress has been made, including dealing with a major crisis. So please continue your generous support of Maui as they recover. They've come a long way, but there's still a long way to go. And look forward to next year, our first budget, it's completely on our own terms, to focus completely on the essentials for our state, which is housing and affordability and health care, amongst any other number of other things. But our priorities remain the same, and we've been able to get these budgets straight. So thank you, everybody, for your help. Aloha.